In my previous episode dealing with the public versus private school debate, we really dug into this anchoring bias that because private schools sound expensive, they're selective, they're prestigious, and the first impression starts to shape everything that follows. We talked about this affect heuristic, that the tendency to let feelings do the early work of judgment. I mean, we're supposed to let evidence form our judgments, but we really don't as humans, right? We're very drawn by our emotions, and that's okay. I mean, I just think we need to recognize that that happens in all of this first, is that the emotions have a tendency to lead our judgments much more so than evidence, and we dug into this. So now we're going to move to the harder part. What happens when researchers try to compare the public and private schools more carefully, actually using evidence and science? I know, heavens to Betsy, we use science to figure things out, right? I just get so, I get it. I get that we're humans and we're led by emotions. And it kind of leads me to story because as a lawyer, I like to think that I'm evidence bound and I'm led by emotions all the time, but something did pop out at me. And this wasn't actually a public versus a private school debate. This was a public school versus another public school. So there were like two public schools, but everybody in school B, the rural areas, just thought their schools were better. And they just had this belief that their schools were so much better. And they would talk about their test scores, and they would talk about the fact that their kids got into higher level colleges and did better long term. But I was sitting in a meeting with them, and this is before we even had a child, and I wasn't really focused on, schools in general. And I was like, wait a minute, something's wrong here, because you guys are forgetting about something: poverty. And where somebody starts. I mean, it's interesting. We like to care about where do they end up, but I like to think about where does somebody start and how far do they go, right? Because that's growth and that's improvement. And some people, the stupid phrase of, people just need to pull themselves up with their bootstraps. Some people don't have boots, man. Like literally, some people don't have bootstraps to pull up on. But if a child goes from systemic poverty and breaks out of that, works to the middle class, man, that is a powerful life right there. That is somebody that's really crushed it. Somebody that was born on third base and thinks they hit a triple just doesn't impress me very much. But anyway, back to these two schools. The one school, the rural school, the school that all the schools that everyone thought was better. Okay. So we'll call them Richie McRich schools. Richie McRich schools, the taxpayers paid about, I think it was at the time about $12,000 per student. And man, that piece of data got out because they found out that the poor area was paying $17,000 per student, $17,000. So that's a $5,000 gap. And they're like, why is it? And this is the way people sounded. I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course. Why is it that we pay so much less in our schools and we get better results than the other schools, and they pay so much more? They're just waste. There's waste. They don't know what they're doing. And they just completely discounted like the human element to all this, which was massive poverty. Massive poverty. I mean, the children in the poor district were, God bless, man. I mean, I started to mentor at the school, some of these schools after this in the poor community, and the kids were more worried about whether or not their electricity is going to be turned on when they got home, whether or not they'd have food in their bellies. And the teachers in that poor district were taking money out of their own pockets to buy snacks and food and school supplies because the parents didn't have any. If the children even had parents in the home, a lot of times it wasn't even being raised by their grandparents in this area. It was them raised by like older siblings or somebody they called aunt that really wasn't their aunt, but they just took in some kids because the parents were MIA or whatever. And they were dealing with a lot of issues. I mean, they were as likely to get hit up by a gang going from school to home as they were likely to remember to bring their books home, right? I mean, it was tough out there, man. And then I was sitting here thinking about this a little bit over time. Is it the Richie McRich schools? I was like, wait a minute, Mom. Wait a minute, Dad. So hold on for a second. I go, walk me through this. Do you take your child to the library back when people still went to the library. And they were like, well, yeah, of course I do. I'm a good parent. Okay, great, cool. Take them to the zoo, take them to museums. You take them. Do you read to them? Do you read to your children ever? Like one night a month. I'm not saying like every day. You read to them one night a month. Do you play with them? Do you take them on trips and expose them to other things? Can you afford a tutor if your child's following behind? Well, of course. They answered all those questions. Well, of course we are good parents. We are good parents. You're good parents with means, man. You're good parents with money and income to do that. And I think that's awesome. You should do all those things. But don't turn a blind eye to the fact that the other school in this area, those families, if there are families, they don't have those means to do all that stuff. So their educational value that those students are getting in the poor area was $17,000 flat. And I did some unsophisticated hand-scratching math on what the parents were paying out of pocket for their child's education. And it was $10,000 to $20,000 on top of that in general. So you take the 14, you had minimum of 10, that's $24,000, right? So the way it was, I was like, wait a minute, your child's getting $24,000 a year of education and your time. 17 grand is all they get. Now, I thought the goal is, we don't want to talk about goals, do we? We want to just bitch and complain about things. But what's the goal? I thought the goal was to get as many children as possible to adulthood as functioning, awesome members of society so they can contribute and have a better life than they would without being a good functional adult. Like, I thought that was the goal, right? I think we forget to talk about the goal enough. We like to use big, lofty words and phrases, to get out there and, get them holistically bound. And I don't know, whatever those fancy words are. I can't pronounce them. But I thought the goal was creating a good adult. So do you want all the children in your global community to be good adults and to be a part of society or not? And the parents, well, of course we do. Well, then maybe we should actually get the other communities' level of per student funding up to like $30,000 per student, because they don't have the benefits of you awesome parents. And I'm just doing a lawyer thing with them. They're like, we are awesome parents. Maybe that's a good point. Maybe it is a good point. Maybe it is a good point. Is it that you don't get just your $24,000 that you're 10 plus a school contributing your tax dollars and all that. You get all this love and attention and guidance and mentoring. They don't get any of that. I mean, a lot of them don't get, some, but not a lot, right? And like, let's be real about that. So why don't we get 30,000 over there so we can level it up a little bit so that when they're adults, we're not paying for the kids that are unfunctional in society for the rest of their lives. And that kind of finally started to click, but you have to have a long-term view on this. And this was two public schools that people just believed this other one was better. And they probably were getting better statistical results long-term, but they were also discounting the entire global view of all this. They were just getting very myopic. And you got to watch when you're debating somebody. They only want to fixate on one piece of information, but it's a more complex problem. Don't take the bait. I didn't take the bait. I don't want you to take the bait. Okay, so let's keep kind of digging into this harder part of like the actual evidence, because my little story had no evidence wrapped up in that. It was just my emotions. I was being led by my emotions. Okay, so let's get into the data. So I think one of the most important studies that I found was the National Center for Education Statistics. Great institution. You can find it online. This study came out in 2006. And it was comparing private schools and public schools using this hierarchical linear module. Man, my speech impediment. Pops, I appreciate anybody that wants to keep listening to me, man. Hierarchical linear module. Okay, this was used in 2003 by the NAEP. And it was on reading and math data for 4th and 8th graders. So a little bit of disparity there, 4th and 8th graders, decent gap. And NAEP is often called the nation's report card, right? So this is the group that we judge all this stuff by. So if somebody's going to look at a piece of data, this is the group to do it with, especially on math and reading, right? And the study used a very large national representative sampling. Now, I think that's important. Large sampling, better for science. Small sampling, not as good, right? So according to the report card, grade 4 sample included 6,900 public school students and 530 private school students. And while grade 8 included 5,500 and 550 private school, right? So that's a big adjustment, over 5,000, over 6,000 compared to 500, but there's just more children, especially at this time in public schools. So the proportion, the ratio, I thought was pretty fair, right? So here is what makes this study so important to us, is that the researchers did not just compare raw average scores and just stop. They use this hierarchical linear module. I'm going to get into what that is, which is a statistical method designed for data where students are grouped within schools. Now, that means they group these people by school. Now, why does this matter? And it matters because students are not floating around independently. They are in clusters, they're in settings, and those settings differ in major ways, kind of like my example earlier. And the model let researchers account for both student-level characteristics and school-level characteristics, instead of pretending that all schools were drawing from the same population. Oh, so people are different. People are different. People come from different backgrounds. I'm going to keep reiterating, what's the goal of teaching children? What's the goal? What's the ultimate outcome? And I wish we spent a lot more talking about the ultimate outcome that we want. My outcome is really simple. I need people to take care of me when I'm old. I need people to be my doctor, my dentist, and my mechanic, and my plumber, and all these things. I hope I save enough money to pay for all that stuff. And I would like them not to be a drain on the taxpayer rolls, but to be a contributor. And maybe that'll make them happier because they're productive. Okay. Happiness is not the goal, but it sure would be nice. All right. So I'm trying to do a selfish goal. Right? Just about me, because I think that that's how so many people really think. They just don't want to be honest about it. Okay. So anyway, that's the goal, right? And so what do they control for? At every student level, the report considered variables: gender, boys and girls learn a little differently; race, ethnicity, disability status, English language learner status. I wish they would have controlled for socioeconomics. That wasn't in their variable. Maybe we'll get another study out for that, because I think that economics matters so much to all this, right? So at the school level, it considered things like, so remember, on the person level, the student level, gender, race, ethnicity, disability, and whether or not they're English learner. At the school level, so you still have this other pot over here, it considered things like the school size, the location. Location. That might get into economics. And the composition of the student body and teachers. In other words, the researchers try to answer a more honest question. If we adjust for some major differences in who schools serve and what kinds of settings they're in, how much of the private school, public school advantage is really left and what it really exists? And the answer is the part people often skip, right? The raw gaps often shrank a lot. Now, so there are some gaps, like there are some gaps in performance at some testing level. Now, this only matters to the extent that the private schools actually disclose their test. Most states, there's no requirement. In some states, they do have mandatory testing, but they don't necessarily have to disclose it. And it's different tests than the public school. So it's a little comparing like apples and bolts, right? It just doesn't quite matter. So I think that there's a form of bias in here that I wasn't sure I was going to get into, but the bias in this case is that the public schools have to present all their data. The private schools don't. So let's just use a little bit of common sense. If your grades and your scores aren't good, you probably ain't going to post them if you don't have to. Think about that for a minute. If a private school gets really bad scores, but it's not mandatory and they don't have to show it to me, why would they? So this is only of the private schools that actually reported. So that shows a gap. But it's only the ones that reported it. I'm going to say that like 10,000 times in my life. If we want transparency, this ain't it. We don't have it right now with private schools, all right? So, but in this case, there was a gap, right? I think I explained that. It still makes me agitated. All right, so the report found, for example, that for fourth grade math, the original private school advantage was reduced to nearly zero and was not statistically significant after the controls. The study also found that no significant difference in fourth grade reading and eighth grade math after the adjustments. So with some advantage remained in the eighth grade reading for some private sectors. For some. I keep saying the word for some. I didn't say for all. And this is much more complicated story than just private schools are just better, because some are, some aren't. Some public schools are better than other public schools. Some aren't. But we just paint this broad sweeping picture. And so this study didn't even dabble on the all private schools are better than all public. They said some are, but it's complicated. And after adjustments, even the sum really aren't. Okay. And the key phrase here is after adjustments and after, whoever disclosed, right? So when people compare sectors without adjustments, they often are comparing unlike populations and calling the result a fair contest. But if one sector serves students who, on average, arrive with more advantages outside of school, then a raw score comparison can tell you as much about family background and selection patterns as it tells you about school quality. And the NCES study was not saying public and private schools are identical in every respect. It was showing that once you compare more responsibility, the simpler the narrative weakens substantially. Now, that's complicated, but that was a statement I wrote down because I wanted to get it. It's really complex. What they're saying is when you take out all the advantages of birth and money and economics and mentorship, you can't tell which school's better. So it's not about the schools as much as it is the home life in this particular study, right? I'm not saying that the education is not important. It is. My premise here is that you don't have evidence. I mean, the people that believe, well, private schools are better, you don't have any evidence of that. You have a feeling, and then you justify your feeling by looking at a bunch of people that look, act, and sound like you, and they're typically wealthier. They're typically born with a more collective group around them to help shelter and guide them. That's cool, but I thought we wanted that for all the babies. All right. So this brings me to another point. When families say they want a better school, they do not all mean the same thing. A newer paper, so a little bit more recent study by Matthew Lee and Angela Watson, Parent Perspectives on School Choice. Parent Perspectives on School Choice, that's the name of the paper, helps paint that picture. And the study used a nationally representative parent survey filled by Morning Consultant, and this was in 2024, by the way. And Morning Consultant does good studies, or I wouldn't be talking about it right now. And it embedded a randomized conjoint experiment. And a conjoint is useful because it lets researchers vary multiple futures of hypothetical student outcomes and then estimate which features parents care about most when deciding whether a graduate seems successful. So they're looking at were the graduates successful. And here's what the researchers did, in plain English, right? Parents were shown profiles that varied across 5 outcome areas: standardized test, going to college, civic outcomes, like whether they were a good citizen, I guess, academic skills, and their religiosity. And because these combinations were randomized, researchers could estimate the independent effect of each attribute on a parent's judgments. So this is a much better design than simply asking parents vague opinion questions because it forces trade-offs and it reveals what people prioritize when several values compete at once. And this is so critical for tests because I don't like it when is this important to you? This is very important to you. And people are like, yes to everything. But when you give them a choice and you say, do you prefer this or that? Ooh, that reveals passion. That reveals passion because people will say safety is important. All the kids are important. And the success of every child is important. But when it comes right down to it, given a choice, you're going to pick something over something else because we all have limited resources. And that's kind of what this study was digging into. So what did they find? Standardized test scores, college and civic outcomes mattered most overall, but academic skills and religiosity also mattered. And they also found that different groups of parents weighted these features differently. No, go figure, right? People think differently. Older parents penalized below average test scores much heavier. Higher income parents placed more value on admission to a prestigious college. That's called an expectation. That's called an expectation for their children. Yeah, I have an expectation my daughter will get her PhD. She's applying right now. She's getting out of college. But I've had that expectation for her since she was 9 or 10. I mean, we just always talked about education. And I was like, look, I don't care what you do and what you got, but you got to do things in a certain order. And this is kind of where the mentoring thing comes in. It's like, I was like, if you do these things in this order, you're more likely to reach success in life, whatever success means to you. Education, marriage, kids, in that order. You can do it out of order. It just makes your life harder. Education, marriage, kids. If you want to do kids, marriage, education, it's just harder. It's just harder, right? People can be successful doing it out of order. It just makes it more difficult, is my point. And I just kind of drilled that into her. I go, you do you. But if you do this order, rock and roll. So she's very motivated to get her education done. I guess she wants to get on with all the other stuff. But that's, that's part of mentoring, and that my wife and I have, doctorate degrees, and that's just kind of the expectation we set. But if you don't live in a household with those expectations, prestigious college doesn't even come up. Maybe just getting your kid to college, just getting your kid into a good paying job is the ultimate goal. Because remember, we're going from our starting line to where we finish, not from third base thinking you hit a home run, right? And so, and then this is some other things. More politically conservative and more religious active parents place more value on religion, right? And so hence they may pick religious schools, right? Because they value that more. That's a value proposition. And that means parents are not simply chasing one neutral definition of school quality. They are often chasing different value systems entirely. And this is why I really preach often about the community should dictate the curriculum of the school to some level. I mean, reading, writing, math, science, history, really critical. But if you're in rural Missouri or Brooklyn, New York, you might want to hit some different things to help them in that area where they're going to live. Farming, probably not super important in Brooklyn. Probably not, when to, how to plow, how to sow, how to do all those very necessary things. And high finance, maybe just not top priority of a school in the middle of Nebraska, right? And so, you can prioritize different things if you're a community-led school and if you're allowed to by the federal government and the state. All right. So because people value different things, and that's groovy. And I like that because it's America, right? So this is a critical insight for this whole debate, because when somebody says private schools are better, you have to stop and ask, better at what? Better at what? Better for whom? Better by which matrix? Better for college placement? Better for religious formation? Better for a child with disabilities? Better for civic making? Better for emotional support? Better for language learners? Better for social diversity? Better for democratic access? The word better is often doing far too much work in these arguments. And the Lee Watson paper really shows why. Families are evaluating schools through different lenses. No surprise there. Not one universal standard. And this is really where the social diversity was important to us, because the world's becoming more diverse, and I needed my daughter to be ready and prepared for that. So yeah, I mean, we live in Memphis, and we didn't want to leave Memphis because it's a majority minority community. She gets diversity, man. I mean, she's dug into it. I didn't say she understands every race, but she certainly runs with a very diverse group. I mean, I don't think she had any white friends until she was 12 or something. I mean, it never really dawned on us. But it was funny, but we went and toured the University of Oregon for college. And she looked at me and kind of big eyes. She was 17, I think, at the time. Big eyes. And she goes, Dad, where are all the black people? And I was like, oh, baby, they don't live. There's just not, that the population's just not as high up in the northwest of the country. It's a lower population in general than the East Coast, or anything east of the Mississippi. And just a lot of African Americans just don't live here. There's just fewer. So that's why you don't see as many. It's not because they're racist. It's just because there's less of that particular demographic group in this area. And she went, oh, it's super weird. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty weird because that's not how you were brought up, man. But that was important to us. And so she picked Virginia Tech. It just had more about what she wanted, but that was her choice, right? And University of Oregon, the Ducks was where it is a little side note. It is where they filmed Animal House. So, what a great university. They would let them destroy their cafeteria in a food fight scene for a movie, especially a movie like Animal House. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's terribly funny. All right. So let's put all these pieces together. The psychological research tells us people are vulnerable to anchors and emotional shortcuts. We know that. We're led by emotions, and we love shortcuts because the world's complex and we got to speed through it as best we can. And the wine study shows that signals like price and prestige can distort what people think they are experiencing. Remember the wine study? The heavier your bottle, you just think it's worth more. It's just thicker glass, man. It doesn't make the wine any better. I mean, the wine could be better. It may not be better, but it ain't because a bottle's heavier. That's called a con, man. It's called a trick. All right. And so the NCES study shows that when schools comparisons are adjusted more carefully, many raw private school advantages shrink or become nil or reverse. And the parent choice experiment shows that different families define success different in the first place. Put all that together and the myth is cracked. It's shattered, right? And combine this with the fact that not all private schools release their actual studies and tests. And do you think that those studies at the 530 and 550 of private school kids, do you think these are schools that chose to participate? You think the ones that weren't doing well allowed the researchers to come in? I mean, just thinking about, now you're going to say, well, the public schools may not allow it. The public schools don't have a choice, man. They don't have a choice. It's public. Free and open, man. They are fully transparent and fully exposed. That's the way you're building. Private schools can hide stuff. Don't say they can't. It drives me crazy. Which by law, no. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors. You don't know. And they don't by law, they don't have to publish anything. So, in most states. So the honest answer is that not every public school is better than every private school. That would be just another lazy blanket claim. The honest answer is that the sweeping statement, all private schools, all this, all that are better than public schools is not supported by careful thinking or careful comparison at all. It often rests on anchoring bias, emotional bias, prestige clues, and flawed apples to widget comparisons. And once you start stripping all those things away, the picture becomes far more nuanced. And that's where we've got to get the nuance. I know it's details, but the nuance matters because if you believe, like I believe, that public education is a public good, we've got to stand up and start to advocate for it more. We have to. Now, I didn't say advocate against anything. I said advocate for. I'm going to dig deep into the subject. I just came back from a really good time that I had with a talk with a group, and such a great group, man. I mean, people that just give and give and give and give. And they're so supportive of their local public schools. And it's just so foreign that you have to advocate, stand up and speak up just for the existence for public schools to exist. It's crazy, right? So they need support, but that's what we're trying to do. And so the nuance matters because public schools are not just another market option on a shelf. They are a democratic institution with obligations that many private schools do not share. They support the entire 50 million students. They have to by law. So when people look at public schools carrying a broader burden, serving broader populations and operating under broader duties, then compare them to the, environments with which they are teaching without fully accounting for those differences, they are often not measuring quality fairly at all. And the NCES report's entire design reflects the problem. Sector comparisons require controls because the sectors do not serve individual populations under identical conditions. Oh my God, that's where I'm going to lead this. I know the data, but for you data nerds, you love it. For those that didn't, you're probably not listening anymore. All right, so the myth survives because it's emotional satisfying, it's socially reinforced, and it's easy to repeat. But easy stories are not always the true stories. And if we care about children, families, and the future of public education, the future of, get ready for it, the future of America, then we have to be willing to do more than repeat prestige narratives. We have to ask harder questions and we have to compare more honestly so we can actually get to the truth. And we have to stop confusing the label on the wine bottle with what's actually inside the wine bottle. All right. I hope this helps. Let's go get them. Woo! Brian out.